Jeremy, we're both back in colder climates after having been out of the league meetings in very nice and sunny Florida. And I keep bringing this up, so it's like whenever I had somebody else on the other day and talked about how nice it was in Florida. I am happy to be home, but I do miss Florida. So it's always nice to be down there. But I want to start with this because you do such a great job covering the league, and you know this league very well. One thing Ron Rivera was talking about at the league meetings was trying to escape the negativity surrounding this franchise, trying to separate the football side from the business side. How difficult a task do you feel that is, and how realistic is that for him, do you think?
Yeah, well, I think when Ron Rivera took the job 2 years ago, he had a pretty good idea that this is going to take some time for that reason. There was a lot to rebuild, not just from a roster standpoint, but from a perception standpoint. It seems like he's done a good job based on all I've gathered. And, people around the league really respect Ron. They believe he's kind of the right man for sort of gathering the troops, so to speak, and getting everybody unified and on the same page. So it seems that they've made strides in that area. But, even the end of last year, even a simple thing like, the fight on the sideline, right? I know that happens in football, but that sort of feeds into their past a little bit. Is this a good locker room or not? Like, what's really going on there? I think those are questions that still linger a little bit just because of the problems Washington's had in the past. But it's a team that plays hard and is competitive. I mean, I think if you take the quarterback out of it, it's a pretty good team last year, So and the wild card of like Chase Young not playing his best, maybe the defensive front not being as good, like you were sort of counting on that. So all things considered, they still kind of made it work and were competitive. So them making a year 3 jump wouldn't necessarily surprise anybody around the league. Maybe, I think 12 wins would probably surprise, but like if they're in the hunt and above 500, that would not shock.
Yeah. And I think, like, personally, I look at if they win 10, 11 games, I'm not going to be surprised because that you can see a scenario where that goes like that.
Yeah.
You talk to agents, players and all that, executives, and I don't know how often you talk to them about Washington, but when you do, what is the perception now? And is it something, because one of the things that set Ron off at the league meetings when somebody asked about, well, do free agents want to come here? And they really didn't go heavy on that. Russell Wilson opted for Denver, and it could be a variety of reasons. And they didn't go hard at the free agent. So it's kind of hard to say that they didn't or did want to come here. But when you talk to people, what is it that you hear about this franchise?
Yeah, that quarterback component is interesting because that is sort of a barometer a little bit, right? Like Denver had, even though they didn't win big last year, they had a lot of pieces in place. Denver's a cool city, West Coast where Russell Wilson already was. So, but he wants to win. So it made a lot of sense from that standpoint. Washington was kind of maybe a rung below in that regard, a tier below. That doesn't mean that they're in disarray and the people don't want to go there. It just means that Denver probably was a little higher in the pecking order. So if Russell had his pick, Denver was going to have more momentum there. Like that's kind of what I was hearing before the trade. Like he would be open to Denver as opposed to some other spec. He didn't really want to be in the NFC East. And so you could put Philly in that too, and Philly made the playoffs. So it's not like that's a bad roster either. So sometimes it's a preference thing. So really the quarterback component is what comes up most often with Washington now when you talk to people around the league. And that's, I think we over dramatize the quarterback spot. Like it's all we talk about, but it's, the money speaks and those guys are getting more and more money because they're more important. So there's just a feeling of like, okay, well, what's really their solution there? Even though you trade for Carson Wentz, like, and it wasn't long ago he was a top 10 quarterback. I mean, it really was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So there's more hope there, more promise, but it still doesn't feel like a long-term solution. So I think that's the question people have is like, okay, Ron Rivera is a good coach. You got some, they'll play hard on defense. You got Terry McLaurin, got Gibson, got some good pieces. Like you can grind out some wins, but like, what's the long-term vision? I think is the question people have.
Well, what is it like with Wentz? What's the sticking point? And it's funny because like here they're going to look at it. He is definitely an upgrade over Taylor Heineke. I mean, and I think he's an upgrade of what they've had, statistically, especially, but over the last 4 years since Kirk Cousins left. But what is it you hear about Carson Wentz? What are the concerns or questions that people have on him?
So that's complicated, probably with a lot of layers to it, because it's like he's depicted as this locker room dud, right? Like there's no other way to describe it. He had a decent year last year. He was pretty good. And they just they were, once the season ended, the Colts were allergic to him. They're like, you got to get out of here. You got to get away from us. And it was a little odd. How should I answer this? There was a little feel that I think the player felt that him being unvaccinated played a big role in his departure there. I really do. I don't know if he would say that. But
I've heard that from other, like, and that's what I was going to ask you too, like for Irsay, like, he seemed to be the driving force behind this.
Yeah.
How big a factor, do you think that may have been?
I think it was a factor. And I think Irsay was the driving force behind the trade. I don't get the sense Chris Ballard and Frank Reich just wanted to ship him out. Like, it worked out for them because they got Matt Ryan really on lesser draft capital. They got 2 third-round picks for Wentz, and then only had to give up 1 third-round pick to get Matt Ryan. So they're happy right now. But that was hardly a slam dunk a month ago as they were going through this. But it was clear that their owner didn't want Wentz there for whatever reason. I think the vaccination thing probably had something to do with it, but there was a flow of the game issue too. And, he didn't show up in big games. Like he really just targeted Michael Pittman all the time. You had other capable players like Nyheim Hines is a great player and they barely used him. Zach Pascal is a capable receiver that he kind of ignored. So that, there's some issues there, but he played pretty well. Like, it's hard to argue with 27 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. So there's more to it. You wonder, like, what's the locker room issue with Carson Wentz? Because he's not honestly, I don't think he's a bad guy at all. And I've talked to enough people who believe like this, he's a good guy. So it's not that, it's just, is there just not like really a vibe between him and teammates? Like, does he have a hard time relating? But even then, guys don't care about that all that much if a guy can play, so there's a lot of weird gray area with Wentz that is still a mystery.
And I was going to ask you that too, because there are some big name quarterbacks who I would not describe as maybe great locker room guys, or maybe not as popular. So
yeah, like Aaron Rodgers. I mean, how many times have we talked about Aaron Rodgers with issues, right?
Right.
Maybe not with his teammates, but just, you hear all these stories about Aaron Rodgers, but the guy can throw better than anybody.
Yeah. And how much better is Washington? Whether or not he's a long-term answer, we don't know yet. And that'll be determined. I think even they are looking at this like, hey, for the next couple of years, he's certainly their guy.
Yeah.
But I don't know that they're sitting there saying, it's a slam dunk. He's their guy for the
Right.
long term.
Right.
How much better are they with him, do you think?
So, I would say I would call them marginally better. I'm not going to oversell it. The thing about Taylor Heineke is, like, you could tell when he played, like, he just gave it everything he had, right? He unloaded the tank every game. So what you got last year is probably his ceiling, and he had some good moments and you can win 6-7 games with him, but that's the ceiling. Where Wentz's ceiling, we know, is if he can somehow put it all together from back in 2017, like you saw the glimpses of an MVP. He's not that same guy. I mean, he hasn't been, or just the track record shows that. And I think the injuries have added up a little bit for him. But he can still do things that Heineke can't do, which is, like he can throw off one leg, roll into his left 55 yards down and drop a dime. Like, he can still he's really one of only like 10 guys on earth that can do that. Like, honestly. So there's still that home run component. I think that's why Washington gave up what they did to get him, because he just provides some hope for that reason. But you got to deal with, the head scratching decisions and the weird picks and whatever locker room dynamic might exist.
And yeah, they absolutely look at that. And I think for them, it opens up a playbook. And so they can do some things they haven't been able to do because of that arm. And you will have to find a way to live with it. And it's funny because you talk to people like, they could just get him to start using some of the checkdowns more. It'll help him a lot. And, I also wonder, Jeremy, too, a guy gets to, you're traded twice in a year. Yeah. What kind of self-reflection do you do? And then how does that impact you going forward?
Yeah, it's interesting. He, I don't know if you saw his like Instagram post saying that he was, it was like an advertisement for a Bobcat company, but it said building a higher road.
Yes.
And I thought that was a great caption in response to Jim Irsay basically ripping him at the owners' meetings after they sort of, just ostracized him after the season, and so I kind of like that response. Like, he's not, Baker Mayfield, where he's just explosive and like going to erupt at any time. Like, I think he's a pretty classy guy. So, but for some reason, the perception is that he's a locker room character or a locker room issue. And I can't quite figure that out, other than, he is a Christian religious individual. Maybe that is an issue for some, but we've seen that a lot in the past. With Kirk Cousins, you've seen that, and that's not an issue with him. So I don't know. I don't buy that either. That's people try to figure it out and don't quite know what the problem is, So, but really, he played better in Indy than he did his last year in Philly. So he is technically trending upward. So I think he can do a lot for his perception if he can just, like kind of give the offense like a calmness. He kind of, he's been so erratic. He's had these moments where some of the picks last year were just, really poor decisions. He can bridge that gap and the one in the end zone that you saw, but he's not the kind of quarterback where you got to play to his strengths. If you run a bunch of crossing routes, I don't think that's going to be like a strength for him. And that was kind of a problem with Indy. They had guys that they had to get the ball to quickly, and he's more of a, a downfield deep shot guy. So they got to find like a rhythm there.
But it's funny because they have talked about slants and crossers. They feel like, compared even with like Taylor, that he was late on some of those and it resulted in less yards of the catch, et cetera. And I think they feel like Carson will be better in that way than they had. How do you feel like the NFC East stacks up right now? We got the draft coming up, so there's still a ways to go. But right now, going into that period, how do you think this East stacks up?
Man, it feels like they're in the same place. It's like they're stuck in second gear. I don't know. Philly probably overachieved last year. So to say that they're going to win more games this year, I'm not convinced. Jalen Hurts should be better. The passing game was stagnant at the end of the year. If they can sort of unlock that, then they might have something, but Dallas probably overachieved. I mean, you got two teams that overachieved that aren't it was already in a bad division. So I don't know that it's looking any better. Like Washington can take it. I mean, there's no reason why they can't go into this thinking that they can win the division. And I mean, the Giants are in complete rebuilding mode. Like new GM Joe Shane's making he's not hiding that at all. He's he's stripping salary, and it's what has to be done. I mean, they've been in sort of this, salary cap mismanagement for a while now. And the Dave Gettleman era didn't end well. He didn't leave them in a good spot. So he's got to clean some things up. So I think it's going to be ugly there for a year. And in 2023, I think they got a chance to be pretty good.
Is it crazy to think that Wentz probably might be the second best quarterback in this division?
I'd put him second best right now.
Yeah,
I think based on pedigree and ability, with Hurts, probably a close 3.
Mm-hmm.
Still to see more from Hurts' passing game. Like what happened at the end of the year in that Tampa game, like he just looked kind of lost. But Philly didn't do anything drastic, which tells me that they believe that he's still their best option. So and he's still a young guy, so he's got a lot to improve on that I think he'll show.
Are you surprised by all the quarterback movement the last couple of years? I mean, there's been quite a bit in the last 2 years.
A little bit, but I was actually asking around a lot about this at the owners meetings, and there are like so many themes that are involved in this. It's like, part of it is the salary cap, I think, where if you have cap space, you're just like, well, let's just make the move we need to make. Like it used to be, you had all these guys on teams that were untouchable. You had quarterbacks or star running backs or whatever, guys you would never trade, and now you're like, well, let's trade them. Like everybody's touchable. Maybe not Patrick Mahomes or Justin Herbert, but just about anybody can be dealt, because like in Seattle's case or Russell Wilson, you're like, well, he wants to get paid. It's not going great here anyways. And we got this huge offer from Denver. Like what else is there to really debate? Even though I know they did really want to make it work with Russell and we're open to that. But at some point, it's like, they look at this as diminishing returns, and then you have a lot of young GMs who are in a new era where they like to deal a little bit and take chances, and they don't see draft picks the same way as they did maybe 20 years ago, so it's a trend. I think it's more trend than coincidence.
It also feels like, a lot of these players have more leverage than they ever have, and they're using it because they make so much money that they can say, I'm going to sit out. If you don't want to pay me, I've already made 30 million. I don't care. Yeah.
That's part of it. Like the power comes with the money in some ways, like the fact that it's once it got over 30 million a year and now it's well past that just in a few years. Like Russell Wilson signed that contract. He was making, I think, 35 million a year. That was just like 2.5, 3 years ago. It was not long ago. And now we're up to 50. So the pace is rapid, and teams are sort of alarmed by it a little bit. Like if you're Baltimore, What do you do with Lamar Jackson? Like, he's not taking a penny less than Deshaun Watson, right?
Right.
So, and they don't, I think they were prepared to be like, hey, if we have to play him on the 5th-year option and on some franchise tags, we'll do it, knowing that even though he's a great player, there's some injury issues potentially with his style of play. So that one's fascinating.
And you know what's also fascinating too, Jeremy? Like, you look at these deals for quarterbacks. What do they emphasize? What do the player and the agent emphasize? Is it the 5-year guaranteed money? Is it 3? Is it the terms?
Yeah.
Is it the number of the money? You know, I think that's where it's like, because then it's, if you're Lamar and you're looking at Deshaun, you just want the same thing. But then other people may want, like Kirk Cousins took less years so he can go out and hit it again.
Right. And I love the way Cousins played it, because he, now Deshaun took it to a new level, because now you have the huge money and the guarantees. So that's why teams are flustered right now, because they know they have to react to that. I talked to a GM at the owners meetings who said, like, name me an owner who's happy right now about that deal. Like there was a feeling there. It's like this frustration, that they're there with a player who had the off-field issues that he did, but he's a top 5 quarterback. Right. So like the Browns made that calculated risk. So it's going to be fascinating, because the money is ballooning to an extent I didn't necessarily think it would get this high this quickly. I think most guys would take the guarantees if it meant shaving off a little bit less. But I think teams now, if you're doing a deal with a quarterback after 3 years of his rookie deal, and you have like a buffer of the 4th rookie year and the 5th-year option, you're thinking, well, we'll give him a massive number if we can control the guarantees on the back end.
Sure.
So that's going to be the fight.
And I think one of the things, and going back to the Wentz trade, one of the things that may benefit Washington, they have him for 3 years. If he goes out and plays really well, you have him for 27 and then I think 26 the next couple of years. That's a pretty good where this is going.
Right.
Now, as long as you're getting the requisite play out of him, then it becomes a good deal. If you don't, then it's like, well, but then you can also move on with no penalty. And if you want to go draft somebody. Last thing, again, everybody always talks about perception. We started talking about that early on. How easy is it to change that? I look at Buffalo, Cincinnati. A couple of years ago, those teams aren't looked at the way they are now. How easy would it be, or how hard? What's the road to changing that perception for a place like here?
Well, I hate to put too much stock in the quarterback position, but the common thread there is they have,
exactly
guys you can rally behind, right? Like somebody you can build around. And so I just don't know if Wentz at this stage is that guy now. But the ceiling is high with him. So, maybe you can recreate some of that. But I think that people are willing to spend on the quarterback position the way they are, not just because they're head and shoulders above everybody else, but it's because when you have one of those top 5 or 6 guys, it just changes the dynamic of the whole team. And so, I don't know. I think it's at the same time, you have the NFL's built where you can rebuild in a year, essentially. Like you can do it pretty quickly. It shouldn't take 3 or 4 years. Like you make the right moves, right draft picks. You spend some money at the right positions, and it's shown you can still win without a quarterback. Like Tennessee. I mean, Ryan Tannehill is not a top 5 quarterback, but they win every year. So you can still do it if you surround them with the right pieces. But the way it's built with the salary cap and the draft picks you can acquire, like you can get good in a hurry for the most part. And I think Cincinnati and Buffalo still would have been pretty good maybe without those quarterbacks. Like they wouldn't have been as good, but they build good rosters, so that helps.
They did. And that's why, but the point I want to go again, to what Ron Rivera was talking about is that, do people want to come here? Well, if you start to win, if you have that quarterback, then whatever all the drama that everybody thinks goes on, people go to where players want to go to where that exists. And, and that's it. Folks, go check out Jeremy's stuff on ESPN Plus. It's great insight, talks to so many executives and coaches, et cetera, for some really, really good inside material for ESPN Plus. Jeremy, thanks for coming on. You're terrific. And again, very few people work as hard as Jeremy. So, just go read his stuff. So thank you very much.
I appreciate that, John. You're the man. Thanks for everything. And you do a great job. So I appreciate you having me.